Revealing my worst mistake? My husband caught an STD because of my one-night stand and he took revenge. I can't believe it. My whole life has been torn apart and I don't even know where to start from. I made a terrible mistake, one that had turned out to be the worst mistake in all my 29 years of living. I had thrown my whole life upside down thanks to my foolishness. My husband took my family away from me and carried out the most utter revenge I hadn't seen coming because he discovered I had cheated on him. He discovered I had cheated on him and given him an STD. Shit, I hadn't even known I had gotten an STD from a one-night stand until he had come home roaring and thrown me out of his house. My whole life was upended from that day. I had been everything a good wife and homely mother could be. Yes, I had done everything to always please my husband to the fullest. I had tried. No one is perfect, and my very first rodeo, the gods had decided to use me as an example. Life is so funny sometimes, you know. One moment I was sure I was in love and had a family. The next moment I was homeless and being threatened. All because I had listened to my friend. Let me tell you guys how I had foolishly made the worst mistake of my life. My name is Anna, and I'm 29 years old. My husband's name is Daryl, and he's, I think, 33 years old. We had been married for about 6 years, and I had a child with him. DJ, my son, is just 3, and he's been taken away from me. My husband took my son away from me in the most heart-wrenching sort of way. I know most of you all will be saying I deserve this because I slept with someone who was not my husband. But it had just been a one-time thing. You don't get to judge me. And I had been picture perfect. I had been flawless. No record of wrongdoings except the one small mistake, and this was how he thanked me for it? Nobody gets to judge me, okay? I met my husband at my 22nd birthday party. I was in my 3rd year of college then, studying architecture. He had followed his friend, who had happened to be my then boyfriend, to my party. We had been introduced and then I hadn't liked him at all. He looked at me like I was a gold digger and wasn't worthy of his friend. LOL, I'm not making this shit up. You'll probably be wondering how we had ended up together. No, I hadn't cheated on my boyfriend with him. This was how we had gotten together. I had gone on a field trip for an extra project that my boyfriend had warned me strictly not to go for. It was a huge quarrel back then, and I didn't know the reason was because he was screwing the tour guide of the trip. My then boyfriend had thought I wouldn't go like I had told him, but I went. During the trip, I had gone to ask the tour guide later after our session some questions, and I found my boyfriend going down on her in her office. It was such an iconic moment because I ran out of there and slammed into my boyfriend's friend, my husband. He was there for the trip as a master's degree student who was carrying out his own project. So I had used him to get back at my ex-boyfriend for cheating on me. I slept with my husband, who I hadn't known was going to end up being my husband. 3 months down the line, my husband blocked my way to class and told me he couldn't get me out of his head, and that's how we started dating. Ironic, right? 9 months later, my husband proposed to me the day after my 23rd birthday, and I said yes because I thought myself in love with him. He provided for me. He cared for me and ticked all the boxes I ever wanted in a man. My parents liked him. He never made me see his parents. Then during our wedding, something happened. I should have seen it as the first red flag of my husband, but no, I was so blindly in love. Let me not leave out the fact that he left the whole planning to me. I got a glimpse of what my marriage was going to be like. You know, I told you guys I was the perfect wife and mother. Yeah, I was, but my marriage wasn't perfect. Anyway, after the whole wedding planning and everything, my husband decided to travel a week to our wedding. This was someone that a special day was imminent, and he hadn't even cared for how the day was going to be achieved. He just upped and left. That shit scared me. I thought maybe he was abandoning me, but on the morning of our wedding, my husband showed up to venue with a smile and wedded me like he hadn't just been away. That was what my marriage was like. I got married to a workaholic who put his work over things like family and special holidays and people he was supposed to care about. LOL, I'm sure I got you all thinking it was something drastic. Anyway, I started to think my husband was a machine by our 3rd year of being married, or a ghost even. This was when I took in with my son DJ, and throughout the period I was thinking, what was the point to life of being married? My husband went at any opportunity to not be in the house with me, always said he had important work. My husband could travel for weeks on end and leave only me. Then he would come back and pretend that all was well. I complained about it and told him that I didn't like the fact that he was leaving me alone coupled with my pregnancy. I couldn't be alone. But my husband had told me he was traveling so he could put food on our table, and if I didn't want to be alone so much, I should consider getting a job. Could you imagine such a statement from my husband? I was pregnant with his child and he was telling me to work. He had made some side comment about how working could even get me to reduce the baby weight I had accumulated, and he left me again to travel. Okay, I never really asked him what kind of work he was into, so I didn't totally understand why he felt the need to travel so much. My warnings came through and I slipped and fell as a result of being alone. I'm not telling you all this so you could gain some pity on me. I'm narrating how everything built up. I did a terrible thing. I don't want pity. Well, I was rushed to the hospital and my husband's trips were brought to a halt because he seemed to love his unborn child better than me. I came out of the hospital and my husband didn't travel anywhere until our son was born, and he took off again. Fast forward 3 years later, I began working at a coffee shop bookstore down my street. I had a degree, but it hadn't been what I wanted. The degree was more or less my parents' degree. I had gotten it for them. But then my husband had continued complaining that I shouldn't be at home. Since our son had started daycare, I should get something doing. He was quite adamant about it, so I had gotten a job at the coffee shop. Step one in my life crumbling apart. I got the job and made a friend, Kaylee. Kaylee was already working at the coffee shop when I got hired. She wasn't married and lived life to the fullest. She was cool and we hit it off. Kaylee always told me I lived a secluded life and I didn't have any friends except my husband. What if my husband decided to leave me one day? What was I going to do about it? Those had been Kaylee's words. She thought I should build a life outside my husband and family. She was right, though, even though she betrayed me later on. She was very right. I didn't have any friends since we moved to Edinburgh, North Dakota after our wedding. For 6 years, I didn't think to have friends. No wonder I was beginning to resent my husband. I took up Kaylee's offer of friendship, not knowing the snake that was slithering under her personality. I had naively thought she was offering me an olive branch. Foolish me. Kaylee and I became friends. I sometimes covered shifts for her and she did same for me. I followed her and she introduced me to her friends and I opened up to them. They had all been kind like Kaylee, but they had all been snakes. My husband was just glad that he didn't have to providing me with my upkeep money, and he could travel when he wanted without me telling him that he wasn't traveling too much and abandoning his child and his wife. Kaylee invited me for pool parties on weekends. Apparently she had friends that were married and had kids, so my son had people to play with whenever I and Kaylee's enormous group of friends hung out. I had enjoyed it, getting out of my house and meeting people. It was a blast all of the time. I didn't think I ever wanted to be stuck in my house. I thought Kaylee was one of the most amazing people ever, and she was doing this for me and I was grateful. I showed my love in different ways. I bought Kaylee gifts. I spent my money on her, bought her dresses, and even opened up my home to her. She was the first friend I had since I had gotten married. I didn't want to lose the friendship. LOL. I lost it anyway thanks to Kaylee's conniving. Kaylee had gotten me into this mess. I mean, I should have seen the type of person she was. I just didn't think she would turn that side of her towards me. She manipulated people, most especially men. Kaylee slept around and left with no strings attached, and when the men somehow wound up back in her life, she manipulated them into gifting her with money, and then went on to discard them again. One had even come into our place of work begging her to take him back. He literally went on his knees for her. My husband could never. She had told him she loved him too, and the reason she couldn't be with him was because it just didn't feel right. What kind of flimsy excuse was that? But I had just laughed the shit off like it was my friend having regular man trouble, and it was super funny to me. You all would have laughed at the experience if you had been there. It was like an inner joke between friends. I had no idea I would be Kaylee's next victim, someone I had thought was my friend. Maybe it was my fault for not seeing it, for not seeing how she planned to turn my life upside down. I had thought she was on my side, you know. But thanks to her and my gullible nature, I made a terrible mistake and my husband ended my reputation. You guys wouldn't believe what Kaylee had done and how she had gaslighted me into being her friend again. Kaylee went after my husband. Lol, how hadn't I seen that, right? I really don't know the answer to that question. I had introduced them when I had invited Kaylee over to our family dinner. I had wanted to impress, show off my husband and my son and how happy we were even though I was far from happy. My husband didn't speak to me outside of family matters and was always off exploring one part of the world or another. We had sex, but it was like a chore and tasking. There was no spark in our marriage. Lamau, Kaylee had done that. The husband snatcher. Once again, I should have seen it. She was always asking me about my husband and where he was traveling to and if he was around. And if he happened to be around at that time, she would somehow magically stop by. Could I have been more blind than that? Funny thing, I was more blind than ever. I indulged her intrusive questions. I invited her to dinner with my husband present. My husband hadn't shown any interest in her. The witch was doing everything behind my back. The flurry of chaos and disaster the witch left in her wake was something else, and I don't think I could tell it all properly because remembering it still wrecks me. You all wouldn't believe how I had found out that Kaylee tried to move in on my husband, and how she still made me believe she had done nothing wrong. One day out of the blue at the coffee shop, the witch revealed that she was going to be kicked out of her house, and I had believed her and worried about what she was going to do. She said all her other friends couldn't offer her accommodation because they had something going on. I had offered to allow her stay at my place. Kaylee moved in that night, and over the following 2 weeks she stayed at my place. Coincidentally, my husband was around from his numerous travels. Was it really a coincidence, though? The first week Kaylee behaved, and I was glad I had brought her into my home because she was good with people. The middle of next week, I got home early from my shift, and I walk into my house to find my husband shouting down at Kaylee, who was wearing a lingerie. She had tried to seduce my husband, who didn't want to have anything to do with her. I had just looked on in disbelief as my husband kicked her out of her house. What had just been resounding in my head was that she had tried to seduce my husband. What if my husband had been one of those types to go along with the flow? Would they have been sleeping together without my knowledge? My husband warned me after that day never to let Kaylee into my house or even into my life. But did I listen? No, I didn't, and went ahead and dug myself a deeper hole with that two-timing evil friend. I avoided Kaylee for about 2 weeks at work, but one day I ran into her and she manipulated me into believing that she was just trying to test my husband. How could I have believed that, you may be wondering? I wonder the exact same thing, LOL. She went to say I had no idea what my husband did on his travels, and she just wanted to test him to see if he was sleeping with other women. She didn't want to tell me of her plan because she knew I wasn't going to agree to her methods, but she had seduced my husband because of me, and he has passed the test. Laughable, right? I had believed that shit, and thanked her for thinking of something like that. She said she knew I always wondered what was happening during his travels, and wanted to put my heart at rest that he wasn't sleeping with other women. I had believed her. Well, Mao. We became friends again. I had become friends with her again, but I hadn't told my husband. My husband thought I had stopped being friends with her and decided to fill in the gap of my friend. That was one good thing Kaylee had done. She had brought my husband and I together before the storm. He started talking to me more. 6 years of being married to my husband, and that's when I found out my husband traveled to survey site and properties for sale. My husband and I became close again. He took me to dinner, told me to dress up, and he opened up to me more. We became friends. He became my friend again because he knew how Kaylee and I had been close and wanted to fill up the gap. How thoughtful was that? But I had ruined it. I had gone ahead and invited the devil right back into my life. My husband hadn't known Kaylee was back in my life, so he put in effort. He treated me like a baby when he was home from traveling, and I loved the attention. The sex wasn't all too great, but it wasn't something that I couldn't manage. This was before the witch struck again. At this point, I really believe I had been put under a spell, if that was possible, by Kaylee, because when the bitch called, I answered. My husband was gone for at least 3 weeks one time after the incident with Kaylee, the beginning of an end. Kaylee had invited me for a friend's rave. I had told her I didn't have anyone taking care of my son, and she had told me not to worry that she was going to hire a sitter. She said I needed to get out of the house, and I hadn't attended a rave since college, so I was eager to go. At least let loose a little with a few drinks. She had convinced me, or I had convinced myself, but anyway, that had been a big mistake on my part. I had believed Kaylee and left the babysitting arrangement to her while I got ready. We left for the party at night, and I had nothing to fear. My husband was away on a trip. He wouldn't know about just a night of a party. Well, I had never been so wrong. Kaylee and I got to the party, and it was already in full swing. She introduced me to all her friends and the birthday guy, and we all greeted. We played fun games, and then it was time for the main game. A never have I ever drinking contest. I drank the most because I was the one among the whole group that hadn't done most of the things people were saying. All because I was a recluse. I planned on changing that. But I got drunk from all the shots, and the birthday boy suddenly looked so yummy. I told Kaylee I wanted to go home, that I was feeling out of it, and she told me to go and lie down in one of the bedrooms. She even showed me to the room and told me to lie down a bit so that we would soon go home. I believed her. I had laid down, and when I'd opened my eyes, the birthday boy I'd been eyeing was in the room and shirtless, and I didn't mean to sleep with him. He had just been there, and I was drunk and horny, and I'd had sex with him. I had felt so awful afterwards and had run out of there. I had found Kaylee and told her that I wanted to leave. She sensed something was wrong, and I told her that I had slept with her friend. She dropped me off at home from the party, and guess who was home waiting for me? My husband holding my son that had been crying. I had never been more confused and scared in my life. My husband wasn't supposed to be back home for another 2 weeks. My husband tore into me that night. Apparently, he had gotten an anonymous call from someone that my son had been abandoned, and there was no one. He had to cancel his trip and rush down home to find that I had left his son alone at home and gone out. I was so sure that my husband would see through me and know I had slept with someone else at a party, and he would kick me out of the house that night. My husband didn't kick me out that night, though. He somehow accepted my explanation that I had been called to the bookstore because there had been a break-in, and I had just rushed down and was clearing the place up and time got away from me. I explained that DJ had been sleeping, so I had left him alone, and I hadn't known he was 2 to wake up by the time I was gone. My husband didn't believe that I had been gone for over 6 hours because of a break-in. He let me off the hook, though, but I don't think he completely forgave me. I hadn't known I had been set up that night at the party. My husband reduced his travels because he didn't trust me again, and everything from here on out was just chaos. Like a week or two after the party, Kaylee sent me a message that I should borrow her $2,000. I had given it to her without hesitation because I had some money from my savings, and she seemed in need and said she was going to pay me later when she sorted out what she was going through. I foolishly trusted her again. I didn't hear from Kaylee for a full month. She had quit working for the coffee shop and just went off grid. That's when I started experiencing discomfort in my privates. I thought that maybe it was just nerves, so I ruled it off. I had more pressing needs. Kaylee was owing me money that I needed for something, and I couldn't reach her. I didn't even have to try that hard because the setup unraveled before my eyes before I could get my bearings. Kaylee texted me that she needed more money. I told her I didn't have any more to give her, and then she brought out the big guns. She had pictures of me and my one-night stand. Can you imagine the audacity of that bitch? After everything I had done for her, everything I had gotten her, the clothes, the shoes, the gifts, this was how she chose to repay me. When she had showed me the pictures, I was in complete shock because this was someone I had trusted, and she decided to blackmail me with something that had been her fault. I wouldn't have been at that party in the first place if it wasn't for her. I wouldn't have been in the guy's room in the first place even for her. It was when she had shown me the pictures that's when I knew it had all been a setup. Someone had come into the bedroom to take the pictures, and I had been so out of it to even notice. I had allowed her to play me. Immediately, Kaylee had showed me the pictures. She told me that I had 3 days to provide $5,000 or she was going to take it to my husband. At that moment, I was devastated because how and where was I going to get the money? Then the gods decided to reward my one night of reckless behavior. The pain in my private had become too intense, so I had gone to see the doctor and found out I had gonorrhea. I had a disease and a blackmail on my neck. How much could a woman take? I didn't want my husband to find out about anything. Maybe I should have just come clean from the beginning. Maybe I wouldn't have found myself in the mess that I landed myself in. But I didn't tell my husband any of it. He was still being kind and caring even though he hadn't forgiven me for that incident. This was the reason I didn't tell him on time until he found out by himself and ruined my life. I didn't want the love and affection he was finally showing since our 2nd year of marriage to end. So I had decided to face that evil witch alone. I pawned the car my husband had gotten for me and used it to pay off the blackmail and then used the rest to treat myself. I had thought that it was over after I had paid off Kaylee. I didn't know she would come back for more. The blackmail became a recurring thing to the extent that I had to borrow money from my parents back in DC. I told my husband that my car was at the mechanic and I needed money for the repairs, but in truth, it had been pawned. This was how I got a little money from him to pay off the blackmails. And all of a sudden, I just stopped. I stopped paying Kaylee off because I was tired. I was tired of the panics and thinking of who to borrow money from and all that stuff. I was honestly tired. Big mistake. Kaylee decided to pay me a little visit. I was terrified. She showed up at my house one day while my husband was around, and that's how my husband found out that she and I had been friends behind his back. My husband had looked so betrayed that day, but I was so scared for my life that she was going to bring out the pictures at any moment and show them to my husband. There wasn't going to be any denying it because my face was totally clear in the pictures, and it was also very clear that the man I had been in bed with was nothing close to my husband. Then the fool decided to play another gaslighting trick on me because I hadn't paid the blackmail for that week, and she knew that I couldn't kick her out. And yes, Kaylee had blackmailed me every week, $2,000, sometimes $1,000, but she was consistent every week in reminding me of the greatest mistake I had made. Anyway, one night after dinner, Kaylee showed up on my doorstep and decided she would prank me and my husband to get us to quarrel. I really didn't know how she got a kick out of that. She was just plain evil, and I had fallen into her claws to do with me as she saw fit. That night, Kaylee announced she was pregnant for my husband, and the look my husband gave her was epic. She said how she had met him during one of his travels, and they had slept together, and all of a sudden he didn't want her anymore, so she was here for closure. My husband told her to get out from his sight or he was going to call the police. Where had I been in all this? I had just stood there shocked. I knew my husband didn't cheat on me with her. I couldn't say the same for myself, though, lol. But Kaylee had brought out an envelope from her bag while my husband was taking out his phone to dial the police. I knew if he called the police, Kaylee would show him the pictures in the envelope, which I was definitely sure was in there. So I had grabbed the envelope from her hand and hid it in my clothes while my husband was turned around before knocking my husband's phone to the ground in panic. My husband was about tearing into me when I pretended to be faint. Kaylee had just laughed like someone who needed to be in the psychiatric ward and had said she had just been playing with me and it wasn't actually true, and then she left. If I hadn't been there witnessing this shit live, I would have thought that it was made up. I couldn't wrap my head around how someone could be this evil and twisted just to keep me on my toes. This was all because I had been trying to save my marriage and not let my husband find out that I had cheated and gotten an STD from a one-night stand my friend had led me into. Kaylee kept up with the blackmails and I was running out of options. I'd spent almost all my money by giving it to her and trying to treat myself of my mess. My husband then found my meds. This was not how he found out. It was probably what led to him being curious at the type of medicines that led him to finding out what I had done. My husband found my meds because I had been too careless. I had been hiding them perfectly well, but I had forgotten to hide them on this day, and he saw them lying around the table in our room and had asked me what I was taking them for. I was very terrible at lying. I still am very terrible at lying, as you have seen from the part when he had caught me coming home from the party. I had been tongue-tied for a minute, then stupidly went on to say it was DJ's medicine, like who does that? My son wasn't sick, so I thought for sure my husband had caught me this time, but he had just nodded his head and let the medicine be. I couldn't believe he had trusted the lie like that, and I was feeling proud of myself. Little did I know that I was so wrong. 2 weeks down the line, I couldn't meet up with Kaylee's blackmail. They were becoming too much and I didn't have any more money to give. I was already head deep in debt from my parents, my car was gone, most of my jewelries and accessories had already been pawned off to be able to pay off the blackmail. But her demands were getting too insane. So she decided to take the pictures to my husband. My husband stormed in from work 1 week later with a paper in his hand. It was a test result and he had tested positive to having gonorrhea. I was so startled that he had gotten it. I don't even know why I was shocked, but he had evidence. He screamed at me that what had I done, and the next few minutes his phone pinged with a notification. Trust Kaylee to deliver something in the most dramatic of ways. She had sent the pictures to my husband's phone. It was like she was watching us from a hidden camera or listening in on us from a listening device. My husband saw the pictures and shook his head in disbelief. At that point, I tried to explain that it had been a setup, but my husband wasn't hearing it. I had given him an STD. I had cheated on him. After being married and treating me well, I had done this. My husband was livid. I begged him as he threw my things out of his house. I begged that I had no money to go anywhere, and he shut the door in my face. My life had crumbled down to nothing in a matter of seconds. I had nothing. No money. No place to go. No family. No friend. The friend I had decided to have had stabbed me in the back and brought my marriage to an abrupt end because I had decided to trust her. I slept at the train station that night and went to work the next day. At work, my husband dropped a message for me. Divorce papers for me to sign, and demanded that I relinquish custody of my son to him, and he was ready to drag me in court. I don't know how I had foolishly gone on to challenge him because I couldn't lose my son. And my husband actually took me to court, and he played my cards against me. The time I had left DJ alone, he used it against me, and then the time I had said the medications for treating my gonorrhea had been DJ's medications. He had used it all against me. After borrowing once again from my parents to pay court fee, my husband slammed me with another charge, stealing and possession of drugs around a child. He found out that I had pawned his car without his permission. It had been my car, but he had bought it for me under his name. Then the drugs. It turned out Kaylee had done one last damage. She had sent him altered pictures of me doing drugs. I had never done drugs in my life, and the images were fake, but they found drugs in my possession. I tried explaining that I had been set up once again, but my husband turned a deaf ear to my pleas and left me to the wolves. I spent about 3 weeks in the cell before I was released to go, as they had found that the image had been faked and the pills were also fake. I knew all of it had been my husband's doing, leaving me in the cell for 3 weeks. I knew they had found out the image was fake a long time ago, but my husband had probably asked the officers for a favor to teach me a lesson. I had learnt my lesson all right. After I'd been released from that hell of a prison cell where everywhere reeked of pee and disgusting things, I went to the train station to get my things, and they had all been gone. Instead, there was a letter on the bench addressed to me that said all my things had been sold off to replace the car I had pawned. My husband went that far as to selling my things, so I truly had nothing in the end. My son was taken from me. No money, no possessions apart from the clothes on my back. I didn't have anything going for me to the point I almost ran mad. But I found my way home to my parents in DC, where I started working in their restaurant to pay off all the debts I owed them. I made the worst mistake of my life and lost it all and gained an STD LOL. I have to laugh because the situation calls for it. If I don't laugh, I'll start bawling again. I had thrown away my life. I couldn't go near my son. I was starting from the scratch, literally all because of one mistake and trusting someone I had thought to be my friend. I hope you all learn from my mistakes and prevent such things from happening to you. Don't blindly trust someone because you need a friend. The only one out there for you is you in the end. I learned my lesson the hard way. I wouldn't get to see my son grow up. I just wish I could rewind back the time because I never meant for any of this to happen. I had lost the only people I found dear because of that witch. Wherever you are, Kaylee, just know that karma is real and it will catch up with you soon. Be careful out there, Redditors.